My name is Greg Walker. I've been training in some capacity since I was 4 years old. I started Taekwondo when I was 4. I went into wrestling when I was 12. I joined the Navy at 19, hard physical training, going to Afghanistan, getting deployed, trained for professional MMA and also competitive Jiu Jitsu. I've been on the mat for a very long time. I say about 24 years of training. And in that, just like everybody else, I've had setbacks, injuries and things like that. And this is kind of how I believe you can train for long term. It's important to realize that, like, if you look at grappling, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, even like MMA sparring, your sparring days, especially the days you go hard, should be the smallest piece of your pie, right? Let's say you got like 100%. As a beginner, you're probably doing more drilling than you are sparring, right? For my beginners, I ask for 20 basics classes. Not that that's going to give you all the answers, but that's going to start getting your body prepared. Like, there's so many things going on, and this is especially for an adult coming into training, is like your body's never been pushed or pulled on or rotated in any of these ways. So having an understanding of the physiological changes that are going to happen and how you need to slowly kind of ramp up your training. I've seen so many students come in really hard, really hot, like a flame. The flame burns really, really bright, and then it kind of goes out. And those are the toughest students to lose. But I've had students that take my advice and start slow, 1-2 days a week, let the body adjust, the rib cage. After 3 months to 6 months, your elbows and your knees are starting to get used to a little bit more of that. It's just a process that takes so much time. And if we start later in life, we have to allow more time for our body to get accustomed to that. So as you're learning, you go from mostly drilling and probably static drilling to start introducing more movement, because as your mind starts to understand kind of the movement that's involved, not only your movement, but now the movement of other people, you start getting more dynamic drilling, right? So we got to understand that drilling is not just static drilling where, my partner's being super compliant and falling over for me, but there's a range of pushback and intensity and kind of resistance that is utilized until that changes over into sparring. It's not just drilling, sparring. It's learning how to drill from no resistance to, some resistance. And then we go into sparring where, okay, this is a guard pass focused sparring round where my training partner is accepting a kind of small set of rules to really help me get better as an individual. This can still be sparring because you don't know how that person's going to react, but it's your job as that student to figure out how you're going to make some of your techniques work. You start getting in a fine line between drilling and sparring, but learning how to do this can help you so much. If you're only going out there and just beating and banging and grinding out, where they say pojada every day, if you're just doing that, injuries are going to happen. If you don't learn how to back the training off and to spar in different ways and to, put constraints in your sparring, specific positional sparring, to help you with, little aspects of your game. But what that can also do is when you're injured, I hurt my right wrist for a while. So guess what? I sparred with one hand for a minute versus taking time off and not ever being on the mat. Some training is better than no training. And you got to look at it in the kind of longer timeline. We get so consumed with kind of week by week. I only got 1 class this week. I only got 2 classes this week. Sometimes we need to look at a broader lens, especially as a busy adult, and you don't necessarily have to be so concerned with the week. How many classes did you get in 14 days? Okay, I got 3 classes in 14 days. Let me see if I can get that up a little bit. Open up that aperture just a little bit. Don't be so hard on yourself and just keep going at it, because that intensity and that momentum will build over time. Learning how to do all this and how to ramp your training up to where you're getting 1 or 2 really hard days out of the week. You're learning how to do your lighter sparring and working on sequences of drilling. That can be a bulk of your training. And then having really good training partners that you guys know how to ramp that intensity up can really help in your longevity in jiu-jitsu.
Today, and I don't know if guys were just being easier on me today, but I actually felt like I was not getting pinned, and I was getting back to guard, at least half guard, and that made my longevity, endurance-wise, a lot better.
Part of that was learning how to play in your grappling. So you remember how in the beginning of that round I said, hey, be willing to transition. So when me and you rolled, every time I got to that kind of quick side control position, I kind of let you regard.
Yeah.
What I'm doing there as an instructor, though, is like that's giving you kind of a specific kind of timing event. You're recognizing that little space that you had, and you're snapping back to guard a lot faster. And so that turns into a more automatic movement pattern versus having to think about it. And so that was my goal. Now, if me and you are having if our sparring round was on the more competitive side, my goal would to be not allowing you to transition as much. Really focus on, if I'm in a competition round, I'm going to take space away, and I'm really going to make you fight for every single inch possible. Yeah. Now, that ends up building a lot of tension. That ends up wearing on our body a lot, and the risk of injury is a little bit higher. If we have a round that we're both training partners have agreed and understand how to kind of just transition and move a little bit more, I can take some of that space away, but I'm okay with giving you back because the goal for this training round is movement rather than just static holds. People ask me, why is jiu-jitsu or why is grappling hard, right? If you compare that to, let's say, a marathon runner. Right? A marathon runner, that's a more aerobic exercise, and they're trying to spread their energy out over the 26.2 miles, right? They'll kind of ramp up their intensity and things like that, but generally it's a slow climb through their run for 26.2 miles. In grappling, at times you have 5-minute matches, 6 minutes, 7, 8, 10-minute matches. Sometimes you can be sub only. That causes us to change our intensities, but you have shorter bursts. You have, not only is grappling an aerobic exercise like running, but it is also anaerobic because there are significant points that require a lot of energy expenditure. So you have to be able to shift between those two zones efficiently and effectively. If you spend too long in anaerobic and in that anaerobic exercises, there's pushing, there's pulling, and there's holding. But if I stay in one of those too long, I'm burning way too much energy. So we want to have the aerobic and the anaerobic capacity to work in that time frame that I need to work without burning myself out too far. If we hang out in the 80%, 90% zone, the red line, you hang out there too long, all the gas in the tank goes out, and then you can't even train anymore. But if we learn how to drill anywhere from the 30% to the 50, 60% range, and at times that 60% is teetering on sparring, but you got to be okay with giving something up in terms of keeping that roll going. That can be why you felt like, I felt better this round because I wasn't insisting on that isometric squeeze all the time. I'll say, okay, let's move this way, let's move that way. So that round is very transition based, so learning and being okay with moving around our training partners. When I was training as a competitor, and even now as a coach, it is important because if you're competing, you're got to be a good athlete as well. You have athletic development and you have development as a student. And we have two people that are technically even and their skill level is even, right? Who's going to come out on top? The better athlete, the person that's more efficient, the person that has more capacity. We had talked about before, like comparing yourself. Like I've been doing this a long time, so my body is a lot more accustomed to it. Or I'm in here and I choose my training opportunities and choose the nights and the roles that I go hard in. And when I'm feeling on the ickier side, I back off a little bit. Hey, I'm just going to move a little bit and I'm not going to fight back as much. Doesn't mean I'm giving up position and letting people just sub me, but you're understanding the early and the late stages in defense a little bit more. And when do you really need to have a lot of force and a lot of tension, and when can you just kind of use the opponent's momentum against them? If you never put yourself in those situations, it's hard to learn to do those kind of things. If you're always smash, 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 when are you giving yourself the opportunity to develop a counter grappling game? Offense is great, defense is great, but learning how to counter is important, and that's where training rounds like we had, you start to learn to exploit those little transition pieces, those little spots that we can look to counter, taking the opponent's momentum on their pass or stealing a throw. It's important in how to train. So for a competitor, if you're looking at, how do I program my running, my lifting, my training, don't expect to do everything in the same day. If I do have an individual that comes in and say, hey, I'm going to lift today and I'm going to train jiu-jitsu today, my recommendation as a coach is do your lifting in the morning, or maybe do some jiu-jitsu in the morning, and then give yourself at least a 4-hour break with some food and some rest in there. Let your nervous system calm down, right? And then hit your next training activity. Or you can do your training early in the morning and maybe your training in the evening, because that way it gives your body and your mind plenty of time to kind of rest. You can run one morning, you can drill one morning, pick out your times, or where do I feel like my brain and my body are kind of in sync and operate the best. For me, when I was coming up, 6 p.m. to like that 8 p.m., that was my training. So I was training hard all the time, kind of focused on my energy. Some people like to train earlier in the morning, but finding that optimum time for you to train and then pour that energy into it, but giving yourself optimum time to rest afterwards. I've had people that come in to class right after a lifting session. I'm like, man, that's like trying to do a whole nother lifting session back to back. That's tough. And once your central nervous system tires out, that's when accidents tend to happen. So understanding how to time block and periodize your training, don't have to cram it into that week, especially if you're a busier individual, a professional with a family. It doesn't all have to be in that 1 week, but take a broader approach, sometimes maybe 10 days, 12 days, 14, and get your sessions in over time to help you build that solid foundation that we can start to build up on. You're on that first level. You've made it past that first level, and now you can continue your training and build some momentum off of that.